Well, I'd like to welcome everyone back to It's an Inside Job. Today, I am joined by a special guest, Svein Harald. I was wondering, maybe we can kick off our conversation by you introducing who you are and what you do.
Yes, of course. Yes, as you said, my name is Svein Harald Røine, and I am a public speaker. Actually, that's the main job as per today, as well as a leadership developer and a coach, a leadership coach. But what I do mostly is to stand on big stages and talk about courage. I'm a father of two grown-up kids, 28 and 26, and they are, of course, the most important things in my life, or human beings, or whatever you call it. They are really important to me, and really, really great kids. So I think we have done something good as parents.
That's always good to say. That's always good to say.
Yeah. and I have been working in corporate life for many, many years, but I changed in 2010, and then I decided I wanted to follow my dream, and I was inspired by Tony Robbins, at an event, 4 days event in London, and when I saw him on stage, I thought, well, I want to be like him. So that was something that inspired me. So now I'm 56 years old, and I couldn't have had a better life, I think.
Well, I think that's a brilliant story. I mean, looking up to Tony Robbins, he's big shoes to fill, literally too. To shoot for the stars. I think one thing about Anthony Robbins is it shows you where the true ceiling is, how far you can actually go if you have the passion and such. And I think the subject you speak about mostly is courage, and I think that goes to the heart of what this show speaks about resilience, equanimity, and well-being. And I think courage is a building block of that element. I was wondering, maybe you can explain why you chose courage as your platform that you spoke about, and obviously you've authored a book on the subject too.
Yeah, there are two paths to that topic. When I had to leave my corporate job as a senior vice president for a large wine corporation, I was what do you call it? Where a road separates, or I had
crossroads. You were at a crossroads.
Thanks, the word. Yeah. Thanks. At the crossroad, and I was considering what am I going to do with my life? Should I continue in the corporate life, or should I actually follow my dream to be the Norwegian Tony Robbins, so to speak? And in order for me to find out what I wanted to do with my life, I engaged a coach. I call him the Inspirator, and he gave me some exercises and tasks and challenges. And after I've done those, I was reflecting on what have I actually done, and I found out that he had tested my courage. That was the common thread, or that was actually what had happened. I had done something that was really uncomfortable, something that I never would have done if it hadn't been a challenge. I had been challenged, and it expanded my comfort zone, or I like to call it a stagnation zone. If you stay too long in a comfort zone, it's a stagnation zone. So I understood that what actually had happened is that I had tested my courage. I had found my courage, and I tested my courage. So that was the first thing that brought me into that subject. When I also decided that I wanted to be a public speaker and a leadership coach, there are so many people and so hard competition and so I mean enormous amount of great people with extensive experience as leaders, starting to become coaches and public speakers and so on. And in order to distinguish myself from them, I needed to have a brand and a topic. I had to own a topic, so that that is crystal clear and that separates me. And when I looked and I browsed and I did some really good research to see what are the other people talking about. They're talking about lots of topics and how to succeed and so on, but no one had actually taken the word courage. They talked about courage as part of something, but they never had put that on top and said, this is my topic. So I said, okay, I'm going to own the word courage in Norway. And I think I managed that, actually. Now people call me Mr. Courageous, and I call myself Mr. Courageous, or in the Norwegian word. And
yeah.
So that is those experience-wise and analytical. So I think if you both follow your heart and your analytical mind, and you combine those, well, then I think you have a very potent mix. And that's what I did in order to find out that courage is my topic.
And maybe we can also, while we're at it, sort of operationally define courage, because a lot of people think courage is having the bravery to move in, to set aside fear and to push through, and to ignore the fear and to go through. To some extent that is true, but I was wondering, can you operationally define how you see courage, and to the extent that you speak to it? What is courage for you?
For me, courage, you can't be courageous unless you're afraid. So if you don't have fear, you can't be courageous. So it's not courageous to jump a parachute if you're not with a parachute, if you're not afraid of jumping with a parachute. It's not courage to stand on the stage in front of 400 people giving a talk if you're not afraid. So if you're not afraid, you can't be courageous. And in English, you have bravery and you have courage. And somehow bravery, then you're fearless. But when you are courageous, you feel the fear, but you do it anyway. And the reason you do it is because you think there is something to gain on the other side of fear. There is an advantage. There is something. It's like, I think when Martin Luther King said, "I've been to the mountaintop and I have seen the promised land." The mountaintop, that is the fear, and on the other side there is a promised land. So, because to just conquer fear, if there is no upside on the other side, well, why should I do it? So for me, fear and courage, they are two parts of the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, they're almost like a coin. I mean, they're both sides of the same coin, right? And it's just sometimes you have to flip it. For me, courage has always been associated with self-confidence. I mean, we all have fears. We all have negative mindsets that pop up depending upon, and it can be very situational. But I think courage, from my sort of clinical psychology background, requires a level of self-confidence to believe in yourself, to confront the fear, and to move through it. I mean, how do you see courage and self-confidence? Do you see there's a relationship? Are they separate entities, or does one feed into the other?
I what I talk about is that in order to find your courage, to overcome fear, you have to find your confidence, and you have, and even more important, maybe, you have to find your self-esteem. I think when you there are lots of tools to become more courageous, but I think the first thing you have to do is to feel that you have this self-esteem, that you are safe in your own body, in your that you believe in yourself somehow, and that is the self-confidence that comes from great performances. That's how you that's how you get confidence. But self-esteem, of course, that is who you are, uh, not defined by your performance, but more that you are valuable as a human being, no matter how you perform. And I think if you can both, or do both, to increase your self-esteem, and you can work on your self-confidence, um, that helps you to become courage when you meet a situation that scares you.
Yeah, and just for our listeners to make sure we've operationally defined self-esteem, self-confidence. Self-confidence isn't your belief that you can accomplish something. It can be kind of quantitative. Self-esteem is how comfortable you are in your skin, if you like yourself. Would you describe it in that sense? If we look at it very simplistic at these two definitions?
For me, that is very close to what I usually say. I say that
Mm,
I say I also always say that if I give a good or a bad talk,
mm,
or if I do something really bad, and
mm,
then my self confidence goes down.
mm,
But my self esteem does not necessarily have to go down,
mm,
because my self-esteem, I'm still the same person. I'm still
mm,
loved by my family.
mm,
They don't think that I'm inferior, or something else, because I didn't do well on one talk, or fucked up in
mm,
some respect. So I think this self-esteem is extremely important to work on, and I think uh, the problem today is that most people don't separate between self-esteem and self-confidence.
mm,
I think it's one big bulk of the same,
mm,
and then that means that if you perform badly, everything goes down.
mm,
You get bad self-confidence, bad self-esteem, and you believe
mm,
bad things about yourself. You don't think you're worth anything, and I think that is a problem for young people today,
mm.
youth, that they can't separate that well, the society today is, of
Mm,
course, so performance oriented,
mm.
that everything is about performance. And if you can't separate those things, I think that why makes people struggling in their lives much more than
I
they
think
think.
that's such a very salient point you're making, Svein Harald. I can speak to sort of North Americans, sort of when the lockdowns, those kids that were in high school and such, and they had to be isolated and they didn't connect with everyone. I mean, this was a vital time for people to be able to build self-esteem through their peer group, through socialization. These are key moments. And, you see a lot of kids who are now in their early 20s or their late teens after the pandemic. They don't know how to socialize. Again, I speak of generalities and
Yeah.
not specific individuals. They don't know how to socialize. It's not because they're weak or anything. It's just those important years, they were not there to establish. And we look at suicide rates and self-harm and the abuse of drugs and alcohol have gone through the roof, at least in North America.
Mhm.
And I think your topic of courage and facing our fears and the ability to have self-worth are such pertinent topics, and to speak about that. And today, that's what I want to kind of get in nuts and bolts with you, to understand the mechanisms from your perspective, how people can take some of your wisdom and your knowledge and experience and apply it to their own lives.
Mhm.
Because I think that is so important what you said. We are so performance driven that we mistakenly and unintentionally, but mistakenly link our self worth, our level of self esteem to our performance. And
Yes.
sometimes we need to understand that performance, as you've articulated already, sometimes we're going to flop and we're going to fail. But sometimes, we've talked ad nauseum on this podcast, but failure and mistakes, they are the best teachers. I was wondering if we could shift to this self esteem and performance. If someone is sitting there and says, okay, I understand what Sveinhall is saying and I understand the conversation they're having, but how do I build my self esteem? How do I build my self worth? What do I have to do? What
Mm.
would you say to that question?
I think one thing, uh, um, one thing that I definitely recommend is that every day you should write something positive about yourself. You should write it down on paper, in a book, in a self-esteem book, or whatever. Um, and and not about what's good about yourself with regards to performance, more what is good about myself as a human being. But you, of course, you can also relate it to performance, that you did good things, that you to other people, that you saw other people, that you were kind, that you. Um, but I think we write, and we have this self-talk that is very dominantly negative. So somehow we have to force ourselves to talk positively about ourselves. But I think, as in everything we do in life, if we only think about it, it's not enough. We have to write it down. I say that if you want to reach a goal, you have to write it down. If you have dreams, you have to write it down. That's the first step to reach it. And I think that is the same also with building your self-esteem. You need to write down what is good about you, and what did you do something good? Have someone said something positive about you? Have you had positive experiences? Have your whatever, as much positive as possible. But because and some, when you write it down and you do it every day, you build an archive that you can go back to, and you can see and you can read when you are down, when you have trouble. You can go and read this book just to build this self-esteem. So I think that is one way to do it.
I think that's very important, because along the lines of, just to sort of riff on what you're saying, Svein Harald, a lot of the times when I'm talking to people, there's, I can't remember there's a quote, but they say the past is experience, the present is an experiment, and the future is an expectation. And sometimes when we are in a negative state of mind, we'll look at a past and we'll think of all the failures, and then we will tank our own self-worth. But we can use that same skill, look over our shoulder from the trailhead of our where we started to where we came, and how we've built, and all the pitfalls that we've overcome, and the obstacles that we've mastered, and the things that we've learned. Nobody can take that away from you. That is your experience. That is fact. Nothing can take that away. And if we, as you've just said, look at all the things that we have done, all the positivities that we add to the world, or what we've heard about ourselves, this can build us, right? And I completely concur with you. Depending upon what we think is what we see, is what we pick out in the environment, because everything is out there in the environment, but how we filter what we say to ourselves. And what I hear you saying is, if I consistently tell myself, I consistently write every day, as a discipline, as a cognitive habit, to build myself up over time, I will start seeing more and more of actually the self-worth that I do contribute to the world, that other people see that I contribute. And so I just wanted to say that, because it sounds simple, but there is a deep and profound elegance to that when it comes to building someone's self-esteem and their sense of self-worth.
I agree completely. But there is also something more, I think, that is important to build the self-esteem, and it has something to do with vulnerability and shame. Because I always say that if you don't own your vulnerability, and if you don't own your shame, you will not have a good self-esteem. And to try to explain that furthermore, I think if you have something that you are really, that is really vulnerable to you, and you try to hide it, and someone start to
Look at it.
yeah, it's really bad, and then you feel really bad about it, and your self-esteem goes down somehow, because that has nothing to do with self-confidence. It has something to do about you as a human being. So what I think is really important to get a good self-esteem is actually to own your shame and to own your vulnerability. So if you know which areas you feel vulnerable about, you have to open up and tell it to someone. You have to open that box and say, this is something that I feel really vulnerable about. This is something I feel really shameful about. Because when you do that, somehow it's like getting the trolls into the sun and they explode or whatever. Um, I, I think if you live and you carry shame, and then it's really hard to both get a good self-esteem and a good self-confidence, because you're always afraid that someone will find out who you are. And honestly, I have to speak on for myself here.
Yes, please. Yeah.
I didn't have very much self-confidence as a young boy, and I was really afraid of being rejected. So I didn't have a girlfriend until I met my wife when I was 21. That was my first girlfriend, and I married her. And I had been in love from when I was 7 years old until I was 21. All the time, I fell in love all the time, but I never had the courage to go. And I didn't feel I have the self-esteem. I didn't have the self-confidence. I was afraid of rejection. But one day I found out that when I worked on this, I found out that I'm not afraid to fail anymore in life. Because that is part of life, and I'm not afraid that people see my shameful side, because we all have a shameful side. So I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid to show my vulnerability. We all have vulnerabilities. So somehow for myself, I found I found that I'm not afraid of this anymore, because I say, and so what? And so what? Have you tried to argue with people that say, so what? It's really annoying. You can't get them to. So somehow I own my vulnerabilities. I own my shame, and that makes my self-esteem much stronger.
Let me ask you then, just to challenge you, Svein Harald.
Yeah.
What was it? How did you cross that threshold, that threshold? I mean, what was it? Was it an experience? What was that aha moment where you said, you know what? I don't really give a shit anymore. I'm just going to move into the unknown here, into the uncertainty. How did you? What was it? Was it something you said? Was it something you experienced? Was it something you read? Is it something someone said to you that kind of a light bulb went off in your head?
Yes.
All of it.
The,
All of the above.
there are actually several episodes, and one episode is it's not is this PG?
No,
No,
go ahead. It's
no, but it's I don't think I don't I'm not afraid to talk about it, but it's somehow there was an episode that that was of actually a fear of sexual content being distributed out to the public, and I was threatened that someone would send that out and show it to the public, and I had to decide, what am I going to do about that? And I mean, shameful, vulnerable. It was really tough. And then I was thinking about Kim Kardashian. She became a world famous after this sex video, and we have other examples of that. And I think, I mean, it's normal, it's human, it's and then I said, I can handle everything that life throws at me. It does. if this happens, okay, then I have to stand there and say, yeah, that happened. And so what? And so what? It happened. And I think I got when I was in that situation, and I was really afraid, and I was really afraid that this was going to be exposed, and it never happened. But then I suddenly understood that, and so what? What if it happens? It's going to be forgotten in a fortnight, and the world moves on, and that actually was a turning point for me, that I found this inner peace, that we're all going to die, and there are people, they are much more interested in themselves than that they are in me, and so we think that we are the center of the world. We are not. I'm not center of the world. People are not interested in me, and it can be very fun for 5 minutes, and then the world moves on. So somehow I found my self-esteem in that. Okay, it doesn't really matter what happens in life. I can handle it. I don't know what is happening. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I know that I have the resources in myself. I have the self-esteem, the tools. I can find tools. So bring it on. I will handle it.
I think that's I think that's a very astute point for a lot of people. I think everybody I know is ashamed of something, or there's some sort of vulnerability or what have you. And what I hear is that a man who owns his vulnerability, a man who owns his shame, that to begin with that road, for me, it takes self-awareness. You need to understand, as you called it, the mind talk, the self-talk. What is the story you're telling yourself? And when you're self-aware and you're understanding, as you've just articulated to us, this story about being exposed or what have you, or being whatever, outed or shamed or whatever you want to call it, is that it took a level of self-awareness, and then you had to frame and reframe and think, okay, so what? I'm the center of my own universe, but I'm not the center of everyone else's universe. And I think what also hit me was, you didn't say it per se, but it's self-compassion. There was a level of empathy you had for yourself. You know, you know, whatever this idiot wanted him to do, to send it out there, or whatever pictures or videos or whatever it was, it doesn't really matter. But it was a level of self-compassion for yourself. And when you have that self-compassion and you are aware of the narrative that you're telling yourself, that sounds like that's a great recipe to own your vulnerability. Now, this is not easy for any of us, of course, but I think through that awareness, through that self-compassion, that allows you to actually, I guess, back to the word courage, to face that vulnerability, to accept that vulnerability and said, fine, if it happens, then I got to just deal with it. But life is going to throw a lot more hard balls than this. I'll get through this. Is this to some extent what you're saying to me? Just to make sure I'm understanding it.
You understand it completely, and that's what I do, and or was thinking about. And but what I think is that our greatest fear in life is the fear of not being able to handle what life throws at us. So you can have the fear of rejection, you can have the fear of losing something, you can have the fear of being ridiculed, you can have the fear of the unknown, you can have the fear of, you can have lots of fears, but it all tickles down or can be summed up in this fear that you can't handle what life throws at you. So if I would like to invite you on a date, if that had been the case, but then I don't have the courage to do it because I'm afraid I can't handle if you reject me, and therefore I won't invite you. And that is what happens to every human being in every situation when they meet fearful situations. They stop themselves from moving forward because they are afraid that they can't handle if it goes wrong. if they are being rejected, if they are being ridiculed. So they don't speak up in a huge among a huge crowd and argue against something because they're afraid they're being ridiculed. Instead, they shut up. And so I think that is the greatest hurdle, or the greatest hurdle for every human being to live the life they want. That they are afraid that they can't handle
the situation.
What life throws at them. Yeah, the situation. So, because of course, if you're courageous and you go through your fear, it doesn't mean that necessarily mean that you will be successful. You can fail, and that is what people are afraid of. So I think if people can get good self-esteem, self-confidence, and own their shame and their vulnerability, I mean, then they can do everything. There is nothing that stops them on their path in their life, because they know that they can handle it no matter what's happening. So if it goes wrong, yeah, well, so what? Then I have to start over again, or try again, or do whatever.
And I think that's so well said. So, I mean, if someone's thinking, you know what, I need this immense courage because I have to face this difficult conversation I have to have at work, or I have to give someone a demotion, or I have to wait for these health results, my blood work, or what have you. I you've mentioned some of it. How do you prepare yourself to step into situations that require such immense courage? Perhaps it's public speaking, perhaps it's leadership, speaking in front of the board, or what have you. What are the steps that people can take to find this immense courage to step into that arena?
I think the most important word or competence, together with being courageous, but also a way to become or be courageous and to step into that arena, as you mentioned, is to be curious. I think that to be curious is probably, together with courage, the two most important skills we need as human beings to handle everything that life throws at us. To move into the future. I mean, the world moves so fast. Competence is goes out on date, or what do you call it? I mean, it's something that doesn't last, because you need new competences, new skills, and things move so fast. So if you're going to really be part of the future, you have to be curious. And in every, as far as I understand, in every situation, when you are afraid, let's say you want to invite a girl on a date, then, and if you go there and if you have this curious mind and say, okay, let's see what's happened, and if she rejects me, how will I react? What can I learn from this? I mean, if you turn your whole life into being Socrates, I mean, there is nothing you can't do, because you always put a question mark behind every feeling, every action, every reaction, everything. I mean, being curious, I think that solves almost everything, because I find that whenever I'm curious, I always feel that I am on top of the situation somehow.
Because I guess there's always a lesson to learn, right? The curiosity, instead of slapping a period at the end of the sentence, turn it into a question. Yeah. There's just two things I'd like to riff off of that, because I think that's very important. Because people feel anxious. It's like, I won't feel, as you said, I won't be able to handle the rejection. I won't be able to handle this situation. And so that brings up anxiousness, this angst. But, for the listeners, again, we've talked about this on the show. excitement and anxiety, like they have identical physiological markers, meaning they're the identical emotion, both physiologically. But what changes it is the story we tell ourselves. As you said, what am I telling myself? What is my mind talk? What is my self talk? Right. And what I hear you saying, Svein Harald, is if I put a question mark and ask myself, what am I going to learn from this? Oh, what's curious about this? What is the reason I'm feeling this way? Right. We can actually change. If we can change that one sentence, we can move from anxiousness to excitement. Right. And I think that's a very important thing. I think it's also how we articulate the question to ourselves. If we ask, oh, why am I feeling like that? Then I have to feel I have to justify my own emotions to myself. But if I just tweak it a little, ask myself, what is the reason I'm feeling like this? And I'm searching for an explanation. And so I don't become defensive. I become, as you said, your vernacular, curious, right? And so that curious, as you said, would then leads to courage, per se, because you want to understand what it is that this situation may teach me.
Yes, that is the point, that I'm afraid, but let's see what's happened. It's going to happen. What will be the reaction? How will I cope if it goes badly? How can I use my competence? How can I use my flexibility? How can I use my intellectual mind? I think that imagine if you're bullied. If you meet a bully with being depressed or sad or angry and so on, you will lose. But if you meet a bully with curiosity, somehow you will maintain or maybe even have the power in that situation. So and especially in the corporate life, there are still lots of bullies there. But when you are bullied and you start to ask questions, that it's quite interesting that you say that. But why? And you continue just to ask questions to bullies, they suddenly give up because they can't cope with that. And I've experienced that a lot. I even actually you have this trolls on social media.
Yeah.
And I was actually writing a blogs quite extensively in the end of 2015 to 2020. And one of Norway's most famous trolls, he started to go after me. And one day that was a time when I built my self-confidence and so on. And I hated that when people criticized me, and I hated not being popular, and I wanted to please everyone. And then I said to myself, okay, I have to train myself. So, because if I'm going to make a difference in the world, I have to stand for something. And when you stand for something, some people won't like you at all. And then I have to build some strength and self-confidence and self-esteem, and believe that I can cope with that kind of people that are going to meet me. So I started to argue with, or not argue, but go into this discussion with this troll. And I said, okay, I'm going to spend this. I think it was 3 in the afternoon, and I said that, okay, I'm going to spend this whole afternoon just in discussion with this person. And what I did, and he came with preposterous
reasoning
of everything, and he accused me of a lot of things. But every accusation he threw at me, I replied with a question. Where do you have any references that you can? Do you have any references? Do you have an experience? How can you say that? Can you confirm that? So I only asked questions back, and he became so frustrated. And he said, yeah, and he got more and more angry. And then another troll joined into this conversation. And at the end, that lady, she said, oh, forget him. He's just an idiot. And then they left the conversation. So so just by asking questions, be curious, asking them, where do you have that? Do you have any references? Can you are there any research behind what you're claiming? he said that I was an idiot. Well, how do you define idiot? I mean, so just to ask questions, to be curious, I mean, you can win everything, I think.
Yeah,
And that helps you being courageous in a situation that you feel inferior.
yeah, and asking questions is also a good way of exploring, as you said, their reasoning behind it. It can also, in negotiations, as I've understand, it also can buy you time. By
Yeah,
asking questions, people are willing. My background, clinical psychology, was always about exploring a person's paradigm, exploring the person's belief system, and trying to help them rewire it or to reframe it or reappraise it to find a much more healthier way of doing it. Some trolls, some people are just out there just for the fight. That's all they want to do is push buttons to get a reaction. There's no quality of conversation. And sometimes you just got to cut your losses and think, okay, this is just a waste of my time. This guy or this gal, they're they're just wired a whole different way than, yourself. But let me
but,
ask you this.
but
Oh yeah,
just
please.
keep that. But for me, it was an eye opener, because I could somehow remain in that conflict
Mhm,
without feeling inferior.
mhm,
I felt that I had the courage to stand in that discussion because I always had an answer, or not an answer, but a question.
mhm, mhm.
So I never felt inferior in that discussion, and and the only thing they wanted to do was to try to make me feel inferior, to get power over me.
Mhm.
So it gave me, I felt an upper hand in that discussion, and that's why I think that curiosity is really important. The problem is that we are not curious anymore, as human beings. I've, I dare say that we lose our curiosity during school years. I mean,
Mhm.
as kids, we are curious. We say, why? But then when you get at school, the school, um, what we do at school is to try to learn, that there is a transfer of competence to
Mhm.
you. But do we really learn to be curious? We have to learn, and then we have to have tests to prove that we have learned. But do we really learn to be curious? And I didn't. And when I ask people about it, we don't. So I think one of the problems is that we lose our curiosity. So as adults, we have to relearn how to be curious. And this is not something I just say. There's a researcher. There's a Dr. Land. I don't, have you heard about it? Yeah, Dr. Land.
Dr.
He's
Land, I'm not,
uh,
maybe I haven't heard this
no,
particularly about him or her. No.
no, I think it's called a NATO report.
Okay.
NATO, they were when they were no, sorry, NASA report, when they were recruiting people, they wanted to find the most brilliant minds, people that were curious and inventive and so on. And um, and Dr. Land, he took the questions that they used when they hired engineers and so on, and used it on kids. And he studied the same kids, 1,600 kids, from when
Mhm.
they were 5 years old until they were 15. And he when so he they the 1,600 kids answered the same questions. And when they were 5 years old, this group, 98% were regarded as curious geniuses.
Mhm.
5 years later, the same group, when they were 10 years old, the only 30% was regarded as curious geniuses. And when they were 15 years old, there were only 12% that was regarded as curious geniuses. And they did asked the same questions, as far as I understand, on 220,000 30-year-olds. And only 2% were regarded as curious geniuses.
And
So
it sound
somehow on the
mm,
way we lose our curiosity, and it might not only be school, of course. There are lots of other things that, but I think school is a really important place where we build our who we are.
Yeah, I think that's so important. As we move into the future, more and more technology, more and more AI and such. And I think those human abilities that we have, those who are able to have psychosocial emotional intelligence, who can communicate, who can collaborate, who can cooperate, who have the courage to have constructive conflict at work, to address issues and all things, to be curious about another person's um, opinions, even if it's cross from mine, even if we cross swords, but it's to have the curiosity. And all these C's, I think, are things that we need to have. We can make an indelible mark on a culture. And it doesn't matter if you're introverted or extrovert, you can have all these, right? But I
Mm.
think what you're talking about are skills for the future. And it doesn't matter. I mean, curiosity is always something we can encourage and develop, like any muscle, such as motivation or courage or resilience. But what it does take is, I think you've alluded to, is experience. We need to put ourselves in situations where we can experience something. And I think what you were saying before is that, okay, what if I do this and I do fail, or if it flops? How am I going to handle that? If it's a rejection from a girl, if I want to ask her out for a date, not that I do that, I'm married, just theoretically, but or are I going to give a presentation, or I'm going to give a big talk on resilience, or you on courage, or what have you? Because I think that is the difference between speculation and strategy. What you're talking about, Svein Harald, is right on the point. It's strategic. What happens if this plays out? How am I going to handle it? If I get all the success, how am I going to handle it? If I flop, how am I going to handle it? And I think there's a fine line between strategic thinking and just speculation, because speculation is crossing the bridge and creating all these anxiety ridden scenarios. And so this comes back to something. I just wanted to segue into something because when I was doing some research, you speak a lot about storytelling, or the role of storytelling in courage. If we could just shift the conversation, can you speak a little to the role of storytelling at work to inspire others, to inspire ourselves if we're leading ourselves?
Yeah, yes, storytelling for me is essential. We are human beings of emotions, and you learn much more when your emotions are connected. Uh, mm, um, and we don't like, well, we like facts, but we
Mm,
get tired of facts. But we will never get tired of stories. When we grow up, and if you were so lucky to have parents that read for you when you were
mm,
kids, and so on, we loved it, and and you were not allowed to stop to read. They had to start. We had to sleep uh, uh, before you could stop. And so we love stories, and everyone loves stories told in a good way.
mm,
Stories, and everything is stories. I mean, why do we go to the movies? It's to see story. When you sit in a social arena with your friends drinking wine or beer or dinner or whatever, we tell each other stories. It's all about stories, and the best storytellers are the ones that you really want to have in your party. The
mm,
people that really are good at telling stories, engaging your feelings, getting you to laugh, to cry, to to really make you feel something.
mm,
And I think society today is, it's just way much too flat,
mm,
especially in education. um, so 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 bringing emotions into education, and to um, um, situation where you try to convey something, information, share something that makes the audience much more attentive,
mm,
more interested, more engaged. So if you have a message, you have something that you want to spread the word of something, you put it into a story.
mm,
Then you get the attention, you get their feelings um, hooked on, and they will listen, and they will remember. Because if remember,
mm,
when you cut yourself on a nice knife the first time, of course, lots of emotions. It's blood and everything, scareful, pain. You remember that. You remember it. When you had sex the first time, you remember it. When you have, when you lose someone that you loved, and you cry your heart out for days or weeks or months, you remember it. So the feelings are. It's a really good way to remember something if you can engage people's feelings. So that is why I use storytelling. So when I give my talks, I never use PowerPoint. I stand there alone on the stage, big stage, alone with the light on me, and I don't want the competition with the PowerPoint. I want them to see me and feel me, and but I'm not the important person. They are. What I am, I'm just a medium. I just want them. When I tell a story, they remember theirs that are similar or something, and brings up memories, brings up feelings. And then when I connect it with a good point or whatever, then they take that. So I think that they will remember more from my talk when I use storytelling than when, or if I show them facts. And that is, of course, when I stand on stage. But when I sell myself, I have a leadership course or a part of or of a tender for a course. When I present my course to the customer, when I'm finished, you see that they have not decided, and the others that have been there and tried to sell their course, they are of course both experienced and good and so on. But then I ask, can I tell you why I do what I do? Why do I do leadership course? And then I have a story where I really fucked up as a leader when I got everyone against me. It was horrible when I was a sales director in a confectionery company Nidar. And it was I thought I was God's gift to the employees. Until I really hit the wall. I thought I was a fantastic, magnificent leader.
Yeah.
Then I hit the wall as a sales director, and it had enormous consequences, millions of Norwegian kroners that we lost, and I lost the the wardrobe, as in football, and so everything was really bad. So I had headache, stomach ache, and I dreaded going to work and so on. So I tell this story, and then I tell how I invited my team. I used a coach, and I invited my team to a 2-day session, and so on and so on. And how we turned this around, and I put my heart out, and I apologized for being a bad leader, and I asked them to tell me what was my strengths and my weaknesses. Well, lots of weaknesses, not many strengths. And how we turned this around and became a fantastic team, and the results became fantastic the next 6 years after this. And when I tell that story, I get the job every time.
Well, I guess it's owning your vulnerability and your shame, and presenting it to them. They say, you know what, this guy is humble, right? He's speaking straight from the heart. It's not, you're not a car salesman selling some sort of product. No. There's depth in what you're saying. At least that's what I'm understanding you're communicating to me.
That's what I'm communicating to you. And I ask people, do you like, when I'm in front of an audience, I ask them to raise your hand if you love perfect people. Raise your hand if you love besserwissers. We don't do that. We like people that are similar to ourselves. Of course, we like someone that has, you have to be a star, or that you have done something that we can learn from, of course. But not if you're arrogant and say I'm the best. We don't like that. So humbleness is of course humble together with great results. That is a good combination, isn't it?
Definitely. Just to shift the conversation then, talking about leadership, let's say a leader's listening to this, Svein Harald, right now, and they're thinking, My team's kind of flat. The energy's kind of flat. And in the context of team dynamics, I'd like you to answer this question to the best of your ability. How can a leader foster a culture of courage, curiosity, as you said, and innovation? What can they do to foster that on their team?
Oh, there are so we have talked about lots of things already. One thing, one thing that psychological safety, that is one of the most talked about words these days in the world. I think that a problem with psychological safety is that they forget where people come from, people that are in the organization. So if a CEO or a leader in a team and so on say that here you can say whatever you want, there is no fear of retaliation and humiliation and ridicule, you will not be ridiculed, will they believe it? Imagine, I have so many stories that I talk about with regards to this, but I have stories with my friends of my sons. That a friend of my son, he was so drunk and he was puking and almost in coma, and we said that we're going to send you back home to your parents. We found him on our lawn, and he said, no, I'm going to go to a friend. And he said, no, you're not going to a friend. You're not in shape to go to a friend. So we're calling your parents, and he said, no, well, then we have to call the 911 or the
paramedics
ambulance
or something. Yeah.
And then he said, no, I can't do that, because then my parents will know. They will find out. And then you understand that there is no psychological safety at home. He was afraid. When he was really vulnerable, when he was in a situation where he couldn't take care of himself, he didn't have the psychological safety at home to go and tell them or lean on them when they really needed them. And you can see actually a pattern with lots of kids in their youth having this coming from that kind of home. And when I asked the parents of my children's friends, they said that our children, they don't, or kids or teenagers, they don't tell us anything. We don't know who they are with, what they do in the evenings. They don't have this close relationship when they're young. And then you see studies from university when in Norway, 50%, it was research in 2019, 50% of students, they don't have the courage to tell what's on their heart, even though they know it's correct. So don't raise your hand and tell it. And then you expect that when they come out in work life, to be courageous enough to believe that there is psychological safety here, when they don't dare to tell their parents when they have been drinking. So I think if you're building psychological safety in a team, you have to understand that it's all about giving the employees and the people in the organization, they have to train their courage. It's their courage that is a key to psychological safety in an organization. The courage for me as an employee to say, I don't think that was a good idea. That takes courage. And so you have, and people come from broken homes, or they don't have the courage, they don't have the self-esteem, they don't have self-confidence, and they come into there, and you can talk about psychological safety, but what you really should do is to help each individual improve their self-esteem, self-confidence, their courage, their vulnerability. And one thing that I find it's very interesting to see in life in general, we never go on courses in the most important areas in our lives. When I ask leaders, this is the fourth, there are actually three more important areas, but when I ask leaders, when did you go on your first leadership course after you became a leader? And I think on average, and I've asked hundreds or thousand people about this. On average, I think it's 2 or 3 years after they become leader, they go on their first leadership course. And I think that's a Russian roulette from the top management to not sending people on a leadership course. But that's the fourth. But in the three most important areas in life, we never go on course until it's a problem. It's being a partner or a spouse. Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult to live with another person. I mean, it's really difficult. It's hard work.
It does. It's an investment, right?
We are completely different, even though we love each other and everything. It's so hard work, and you have, and we get experiences from, and we grow, and we can grow different ways. So it's really hard work. And why don't we go on love courses or and do that when in peacetime, when we love each other, to learn how to cope with the difficult times that are ahead of us. So I think that's the first area. Being parents. The first parent, you read books and you go on courses to breathe and so on. And the second that kid's head is out of the
it's born, no
one goes on the courses. And imagine kids, what we go through during our our life, and with the puberty and bullying and how to cope with everything that we didn't cope with when I was young. So why don't we go on courses? I mean, every parent should actually go on a course every 3 years or something to just learn and get new impulses how to become a good coach for your kids, because you have your kids on loan. You are going to send them out on the world to help the motherland, the fatherland, to I mean, somehow. So that's that too. But the most important thing is yourself, of course. I mean,
I think it's so important what you're saying, because I mean, I think what needs to also be focused in schools is just that. I think it's critical thinking. It's, as you're saying, to walk back and strategically think about what happens if I do flop? What happens if I do succeed? How do I deal with it? To have that critical thinking, to ask questions, to be able to ask so if a leader or if a teacher says something, the teacher or the leader shouldn't shoot down. It's a legitimate question. They're coming from a place of curiosity. By encouraging that psychological safety, that curiosity. I think also financial education. I don't think kids, or many of us, are being educated financially, just understand how a budget is. I think that's the thing. But back to your point about courage and the psychological safety, I think everybody should take some sort of basic psychosocial emotional course in psychology to understand communication, to understand the exploration of certain things. You speak to courage. The reason I started about this is that it was about resilience. And I saw so many people who are unintentionally fragile, or they have so many self-critical thoughts. They feed themselves with so much self-doubt. And of course, this is unintentional. And it's people don't sometimes have the know-how or the knowledge of how to do it. You get up on stage, you run leaderships on courage and curiosity, and to understand that about embracing vulnerability. And in a sense, I'm a shade of that per se, but I talk about resilience and equanimity, and to talk about these, because I think these are all life skills that we're not born with. We have to go through the crucible. We have to go through the gauntlet of pain sometimes to understand. We need to have experience, I think. And so I completely concur with what you've said today, or at least up to now so far, right?
And resilience. I talk a lot about that as well, and I think resilience is somehow the ability to think that I can handle everything that life throws at me. That is resilience, because you can't control the world around you. If you try to do that, you will go mad, or you will get depressed, or whatever. You can't control it. But what you can do is you can control how you react to the world. To a very great extent, actually, I think. But if you have this attitude that, well, bring it on. I will find a way to solve it. I will find a way. I have the resources in me, or I will find the resources outside of me to do it. I'm sure I can. Somehow I think that really fuels your self-confidence and your self-esteem and your resilience to really think that I can handle everything. And honestly, I believe I can. And of course, I'm going to end flat on my face. That's going to happen. But then I know that I will. Then, well, I think I can't remember where I've read this or heard it, but they say that the most happy people in the world, one of the most important traits is they are really quick at accepting the new situation they are in. So if you fall flat on your face, then okay, that's where I am now. This is where I have to work from. Not looking back and saying, "Oh, why I wish I had something else, or were somewhere else, or this hadn't happened," and so on. But if you can accept the situation you're in and think, "Okay, this is where I have to work from now. This is a start. This is a new starting point. This is." I think it's
well said. Well said. I agree with you. We have to meet ourselves where we are at that point in time, and then move forward from there, right? I mean, there is a lot of wishful thinking. We can ask ourselves, why me? Why me? It's okay. You can ask yourselves, and you can do that for a day. But afterwards is like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to move through the storm? I don't like the storm. I wish it was gone, but there it is in front of me. But I'm motivated to get through the storm. I know I'm going to get bruised and battered walking through that, but I will come out stronger on the other end. And I think a lot of this comes back down to the mind talk, the self-talk we tell ourselves, right? And I think one poignant point you made is, once you lost your senior vice presidency of the wine company and such, you said you hired a coach, and that coach had given you, she or he had given you some questions, and those questions kind of triggered your thinking. And so sometimes it's not always about leading ourselves. We can find the support out there, depending on what kind of support, but there's people out there who are competent and knowledgeable. And sometimes it's just being vulnerable, as you said before, and thinking, okay, you know what? Maybe I can't handle all this. Maybe I need a sparring partner or a coach or someone to help me through this, but I will get through it. I have to do the work, but maybe I need someone as a catalyst just to fire my thinking, to reframe something I can't see, to help me to move from my subjective storm to the objective perspective that I need in order to see the path or the direction to move forward. I think that was really good what you said. In that sense,
it's true. It's true, and as I mentioned, that coach, he asked me 3 questions. The first question was when I was really depressed, and someone said, "How big is your problem in a world context?" I mean, and he said, "How many people out there in the world you would like to trade their problem with your problem?" And the third question he asked me was, how can you turn this problem into an advantage for you? Not only not just solve it, but to an advantage. And I think it's all about perspective, isn't it? In the end, it's all about perspective. But I think I love this. I love this quote from. I never remember his name, but Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, Viktor Frankl.
Thank you, Viktor Frankl. And his quote when he says that power outside you can take away everything from you, except one thing: the freedom. And he used the word freedom to decide how you will respond to that. And I think that is a lovely way to see things. You can't control things around you, but you still have a freedom that no one can take away from you to decide how you will react on what's happening to you.
And I think just to give context to Viktor Frankl, him being, I believe he was a psychologist in the death camps of Nazi Germany when he came up with his therapy called logotherapy. And so it was in the depths of that despair and darkness that he says this, not sitting on top of a mountain when everything is going well. He had lost his family, he'd lost everything. And he was right in there in that darkness when he said that. And so it shows the depth and the context in which those words, as simple as they sound, again, have a profound and deep elegance to help us. Because the emotions will come up, but we can decide, as you've said, Svein Harald, we can choose what do we want to do with those emotions? Do we want them to flatten us, or do we want to move forward? I am very respectful of your time, Svein Harald. I just was wondering, what message would you like to leave our listeners with, about the power of courage to transform their lives, whether privately or professionally? I know we've covered a huge spectrum here, but is there something that maybe you can leave our listeners with today?
Yes. The most important trait, the most important thing you can, trait you can have, is to be courageous. I think as a human species, they say that love is the most important thing for us as a species to survive. But without courage, love will not get wings. I mean, without courage, without that millisecond of courage that I have to ask a lady for a cup of coffee or a date, without that millisecond of courage, we will not get a chance. There will not be an opportunity between us. So everything in life, everything starts with this millisecond of courage. Whether you want to ask for a promotion, ask for more money, if it is to go into a customer meeting, if it is to raise your hand in a situation, if it is to say, yes, I will give a speech in my friend's wedding, everything, it's that millisecond of courage that is the key to life itself.
Well said. I think that was a perfect place to end this conversation. Svein Harald, I just want to truly thank you for the privilege and the time that you've given today to share your knowledge. And I think there's we've talked a lot of nuts and bolts here today, things that people can use. So thank you. I'm very appreciative for your time today. It's
an honor and a privilege, and I'm really happy that I was invited. So thank you very much for allowing me to share my thoughts. And you're a fantastic host as well.
Thanks. I didn't pay him to say that, folks. Thanks, Svein Harald.